My name is James Walker. I'm 51 years old, a retired U.S. Army captain, and for most of my life, I've lived like a ghost in my own story. I gave 3 decades to the military, served in 2 wars, and earned a chest full of medals, but nothing I did on the battlefield ever hurt as much as what happened at home. I live alone now. Just me, a quiet apartment in El Paso, and the kind of silence that seeps into your bones. People think retirement is a reward, but for me it's been a long stretch of space filled with memories I never asked to keep. The truth is, I've been carrying something for years. Not a wound you can see, but something deeper, something that started the day my mother died and my stepfather looked me in the eye and said, "You're not blood." That was it. That was the moment I lost everything. I didn't just lose a home or a family. I lost my place in the world. I was 18, still in uniform for my high school JROTC graduation, and I walked out of that funeral with $500 in a duffel bag. No one came after me. No one asked if I was okay. There's a certain kind of pain that teaches you to stay quiet. You bury it. You build walls. And for a long time, I thought I had buried mine deep enough. But the past doesn't stay buried forever. Especially when the lie it's built on is still out there, living in someone else's mansion, with your mother's name etched in stone at the gate. I never talked about this before. Not to my squad, not to the therapists the Army tried to send me to after my second deployment. But something happened last winter that changed everything. Something that made me realize I couldn't keep this locked away anymore. This story isn't just about what I lost. It's about what I found 30 years too late, and how I took back my name, my legacy, and the truth that should have never been hidden in the first place. I was 9 when Roland married my mom. She'd been a military nurse. Her whole life, raised me mostly on her own after my dad died in a training accident. We didn't have much, but it never felt like we were missing anything because we had each other. Then Roland came into our lives. He was smooth, polished, always in a tailored suit. He had money cars, a house in Highland Park, and the kind of charm that could win over a room in 5 minutes. My mom fell for him fast, and to be honest, I think part of her just wanted a soft landing after so many years of struggle. At first, I tried to like him. I really did. But Roland never made an effort to hide how little he cared for me. He never said it outright, not at first, but the message was always there in the way he spoke to me. Cold, dismissive, like I was some guest overstaying my welcome. He called me James, never son. He never came to any of my football games. He skipped my ROTC banquet, even though I gave a speech and got an award. Whenever I asked him a question, he'd sigh like I was wasting his time. My mom saw it. She tried to bridge the gap, but I think even she knew Roland didn't want me around. Still, she never let him push me out. As long as she was alive, I had a home. That was the one thing she always promised me, that no matter what happened, I would never be alone. She got sick my senior year. By the time the doctors found the cancer, it was too late. 6 months later, I was standing at her gravesite in uniform, hands shaking hard in pieces. Roland stood next to me with his hand on my shoulder like he was doing me a favor. After the burial, he called me into his study. I still remember the smell in that room, leather chairs, bourbon, and old wood. He didn't even sit down, just reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Said it was from my mother. Inside was $500 and a single key to a storage unit downtown. I asked what was going on. He looked at me dead in the eye and said, "You're not blood, James. My mother's gone. And now, so are you." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, heart pounding, thinking this had to be a mistake, that he was grieving, confused, saying something he didn't mean. But he meant it. I left that house with a duffel bag, that envelope, and the clothes on my back. None of the staff said goodbye. None of the neighbors called. My world just vanished in a single afternoon, and Roland never looked back. That line stuck with me. "You're not blood." It echoed through boot camp, through every letter I sent that never got a reply, through every quiet night overseas when I wondered if maybe I had done something to deserve it. The truth is, I hadn't. I was just in the way of a man who wanted everything my mother built without the burden of a son she brought with her. And for a long time he got exactly what he wanted. I enlisted the week after graduation. With nowhere to go and no one waiting for me, the army became my only home. It didn't ask who I belonged to or where I came from. It asked if I could follow orders, hold my ground, and push through when everything inside me wanted to quit. Basic training hit hard, but not as hard as getting left behind by your own family. That pain made me sharper. I learned to shoot, to lead, to speak with calm under fire. Within 5 years, I was promoted to staff sergeant. 10 years in, I was commanding missions overseas. Afghanistan, Iraq, a brief tour in South Korea. I saw more in those deployments than most people see in a lifetime. Through every operation, through the sandstorms and sniper fire and long nights under foreign skies, I held on to one thing: my mother raised me better than the man who threw me away. I never lost that. No matter how many medals they pinned to my chest or how many soldiers I led home, there was always a piece of me that stayed stuck in that moment, standing alone in a dead woman's house, holding a $500 goodbye. I watched from afar as Roland built a life off my mother's name. Charity galas, foundation dinners. He even had a wing of the children's hospital named after her, but not once did he mention she had a son. That name should have been mine to carry. That legacy belonged to the woman who gave me everything and the man she raised, not the stranger who erased me from it all. I never let that bitterness show in uniform, but it followed me quietly, like a second shadow. I told myself I didn't need revenge. That honor was its own reward. But deep down, I always knew if the chance ever came to set things right, I'd take it. Not out of hate. Out of love for the one person who never stopped fighting for me even after she was gone. A few months after retiring, I finally opened the envelope Roland gave me all those years ago. It had sat untouched in the back of a drawer for decades. The key inside was still taped to a faded note that simply read Unit 47B Southland Storage. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe a box of photos, some old Christmas cards, something to remind me my mother had once called that house a home. The storage facility looked like it hadn't changed since the 90s. Rows of metal doors, the smell of dust and concrete, and a silence that felt heavier than usual. The lock clicked open and the metal door groaned as I pulled it up. Most of what was inside had been untouched for 30 years. Plastic bins, stacked high old luggage, a few framed certificates wrapped in newspaper. I stood there for a while, just staring like I was waiting for her voice to come out of the walls and tell me where to begin. In the far corner, behind a broken lamp and a box of her nursing uniforms, I spotted a small grey box. It looked out of place, military, cold-locked. I pried it open with a screwdriver I found nearby. Inside, everything changed. There was a letter on top, written in her handwriting. The edges were brittle, the ink slightly smudged. She had written it just a few weeks before she died. She told me she was proud that she trusted I'd make a life she could believe in. And then came the part that stopped my breath. She said she'd updated her will and left everything in my name. Her home, her savings, even a list of charitable donations she wanted to continue in my honor. Underneath the letter were receipts. A check paid to a law office dated 3 months before her death. Copies of documents, one stamped FINALWIL, the other labeled DRAFT. The signatures didn't match. I knew my mother's handwriting. One of them wasn't hers. I sat on the cold floor holding her words in one hand and a truth I'd never expected in the other. All those years I thought I'd been abandoned, but she never left me. Someone else had taken her voice and rewritten the story. And for the first time in 30 years, I had a piece of her back. I drove straight to my uncle's house the next morning. Charles was my mother's younger brother, a retired probate attorney who still read legal briefs for fun and hadn't missed a court ruling since Reagan left office. He was the only family member who ever checked in on me after I left, and the only person I trusted to tell me if what I'd found was real. He read the letter first. His hands didn't shake, but his jaw tightened. He read every line twice, then moved to the receipts and the will copies, holding them up to the light like he could see through the lies baked into the paper. I sat across from him, watching a man who never rushed anything suddenly fall into a silence so thick it made the room feel smaller. After a long pause, he looked up and said what I'd already started to suspect. The original will had been overwritten. Someone had filed a false version, one that excluded me entirely and shifted everything to Roland. Charles recognized the name of the lawyer on the final version. A man known in the legal community for playing dirty, especially when large estates were involved. He pulled out a legal pad and started sketching a timeline. Dates, names, amounts, his handwriting fast and furious. He muttered things like chain of custody and probate court manipulation. He even pointed out how the draft copy matched the timeline my mother mentioned in the letter, while the official one was filed days after she passed, likely without her consent. Then he stopped and looked at me like he was weighing something big. He told me I couldn't go into this blind. If we were going to challenge a forged will, after 30 years I needed forensic proof. Handwriting analysis. Ink dating. Paper aging. He had contacts, people he trusted, and he'd make the calls that day. I felt something shift inside me. For years I'd lived with a kind of quiet ache, the kind that numbs you after a while. But sitting in that chair with proof on the table and Charles ready to fight, I felt the ache turn into something else. Purpose. This wasn't just pain anymore. It was evidence. And it was mine. Filing the lawsuit felt like stepping onto a battlefield again, only this time the weapon was truth. With my uncle's help and a small legal team he assembled, we submitted the claim to probate court, attaching the original will, the forensic reports, and my mother's letter. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about honoring her voice, the one that had been stolen and silenced. The day of the hearing I wore my dress uniform. I didn't do it for pride. I did it so Roland would see everything he tried to erase standing right in front of him. When he walked into that courtroom and saw me, his face dropped for a split second. Then he forced a smile, like this was just a misunderstanding we could clear up quietly. The judge asked for opening statements, and the room shifted. Our lawyer presented the evidence methodically. The handwriting discrepancies, the altered filing dates, the ink analysis that showed one document was printed after my mother died. Each piece landed like a drumbeat, steady and impossible to ignore. Roland's attorney tried to dismiss it all, claimed the documents were fake, the memories unreliable, the science inconclusive. But Roland looked less sure each time we brought out a new page. When we played a recording of my mother's voice from a voicemail she left me in high school, quoting nearly the same words as in her letter, the courtroom went quiet. Not a single person could pretend anymore. I sat there, calm, hands folded. I didn't flinch when Roland's lawyer raised his voice. I didn't look away when the judge narrowed his eyes and began to ask questions about the timing of the final will. I just waited steady in the storm, knowing for the first time in decades the truth had weight. And it was finally being heard. By the end of that day, the judge hadn't ruled yet, but I saw it in his face. He knew. Everyone in that room knew. Roland didn't just steal from me. He buried a woman's last wishes and replaced them with lies. And now that truth had come home. The verdict came 2 weeks later. The judge ruled that the original will had been fraudulently suppressed and every asset Roland had claimed was to be returned to me as my mother's rightful heir. But it wasn't the money that mattered most. It was watching Roland, a man who had lived for prestige, lose the one thing he couldn't buy back: his reputation. The media picked it up fast. His name was stripped from the hospital wing. Former friends stopped answering his calls. But I didn't celebrate. I didn't throw a party or call to rub it in. I just sat in my car afterward, staring at the courthouse, breathing in the quiet letting go of something I didn't even know I was still holding. I used a portion of the inheritance to rebuild what my mother would wanted. Her favorite foundation for military families was on the brink of shutting down. I wrote a check that kept it going for another decade, not for the spotlight, just because I knew it's what she would have done. I didn't get my childhood back. I didn't get to say goodbye the right way. But I gave her name the ending it deserved. And in doing that, I finally found mine. After the case ended, I spent a long time asking myself what came next. I had won, sure, but revenge has a short shelf life. What lasts is what you build when the storm clears. I thought about my mother, about the way she gave everything without ever asking for anything back. That's what stayed with me. So I took what she left me and did something she'd be proud of. I bought an old community center on the edge of town and turned it into a place for veterans. A place where guys like me could sit down, breathe easy, and not have to explain the heaviness they carried. We offer job training therapy, a quiet room if you just need to sit with your thoughts. It's not flashy. There's no big plaque with my name on it. But every time someone walks through those doors and finds help, I feel like I'm giving back a piece of what I lost. And every time a young vet calls me brother or thanks me for the space, I remember the one line that used to haunt me. He said, I wasn't blood, but I became family to people who needed one.